So just kind of a survey of everyone who's here, if you could put into the chat box, how many of you have your recurring report set up successfully? Hi, this is Jennifer Brooks. For people who just joined, I'm going to be leading the discussion today on recurring reports. And just to repeat an earlier question, if you could respond in the chat box, how many of you have set up recurring reports, and how are they working for you if you have? It might be you just want to hand them the application. I see that Barb hasn't really done any yet, but that Kim has some.
Okay, I think it was 8 pages. No, now he wrote the name of the check to the wrong person.
Okay. And Kim has some recurring reports set up as well. Good. Recurring reports can be very nice because they can be sent to your email automatically every month. They can just be waiting for you the first thing every, first of the month when you come into work, so you don't have to have this scramble every month to get statistics. That said, there are certain types of statistics that work better with recurring reports and others that don't work so well. Today we're going to focus on some really basic ones, and that would be count of circulations and new patrons added and new items added. Those are the ones that I run into the most.
Do you want it? Yeah, I'm taking stuff home that I think I could use in that so that I'll make that. Oh, here. What did I do with that? I don't remember where this one came from. I put 3 more things in the back room.
Okay, so it's 2:05 and we're up to 13 people in the meeting room. So I figure we're going to get ready to start, if that's all right with everyone. All right. So welcome everyone to the Reports Town Hall today. My name is Jennifer Brooks, and I'll be leading the discussion. And today we wanted to have a focus on recurring reports. With a lot of new libraries coming on, we want to make sure that everyone knows how to set up reports that are recurring friendly so that every first of the month you don't have this scramble to run reports and get numbers and everything, and it makes your monthly tasks a lot simpler. Okay, so just to begin, I'm going to talk about general practices for recurring reports. I try to follow the KISS principle, and that is to keep it simple and short. I try to avoid relative variables, especially when it comes to dates. I try to use very concrete dates instead, because when you're using variables, they can affect your output depending on what time you run the report. And by time, I mean on the 1st of the month or the 10th of the month, etc. Your numbers could be affected depending on the types of transforms and variables that you use. So for that reason, I keep everything very simple, and especially with dates, I keep them very concrete. And I try to build templates that can be used for multiple reports, even though every day I usually end up building at least 1 or 2 reports from scratch for some type of specific need. And one of the real challenges with the Webby reporter is that it allows you to have display fields and also filter fields with transforms that don't actually work with the field that you selected sometimes. So it's just one of my rules is to always double check the transforms that you have set up with your fields. And then I also try and talk with everyone who needs these numbers about why they need certain types of numbers. And sometimes that discussion can lead to simplifying our workflows and our reporting needs. So today we're going to focus on some really basic reports that almost everyone would need, and they're set up in a way that are recurring friendly. And they are going to be located in the shared folder for Babelbrook, which of course, because I'm logged in, you can't see it here under the shared folders list on the lower left-hand side. But if you were looking at your shared templates folder, you would see one there for Babelbrook, B-R-U-C-H, and within that folder, there should be another folder that says Reports Committee. And inside of that folder is going to be the reports that we're going to focus on today. And those are the count of circulations by library location and year plus month, count of circulations by selected municipalities, and count of circulations by StatCats. There's going to be a couple of different iterations of that to show you how that output can be tailored to what you need. And then we're going to have a couple of examples of counts of items added by library location and active year, and then a count of new patrons. And then there's also 2 reports on here that instead of counts are actually lists, and they are lists of items by selected shelving location and lists of titles with highest circulation. Okay. And I always remember that this magnifying thing is a little dizzying. So the first thing to talk about is sources. And typically the sources that everyone is going to be using is going to be circulation, in some cases overdue circulation, ILS user, and item. And when we're talking about sources, when you create a template from scratch, one of the first things you have to do is select a core source. And that happens right here. It comes up in alphabetical order, a list of all of these sources, and when you first look at them, you have no idea what any of them are for. But the only ones that you really need to pay attention to are circulation, the ILS user occurs further down, and then item. And you use the same sources no matter if you're creating a list or if you're creating a count type of reports. There are usually 2 types of reports that people make, and one is a count of things and the other is a list of things. Whether it be patrons, items, or circulation, it's always going to be the same sorts of sources. Okay, and then pretty much every report that you're going to deal with is going to have some sort of date happening as a filter. And I typically find that there are only a few transforms that I use most of the time for filters and display fields. Those tend to be year plus month, year and date. And those keep things very simple and concrete. And then when you're doing counting in reports, there are certain fields that you want to use for counting. And the most common ones that you'll be running into with these types of reports are going to be circ ID. In that case, it's a count of circulations. And then there's user ID, which is the count of patrons. Some people ask me, why do we use the user ID rather than a patron's barcode? The reason for that is you can have patron cards in some cases with no barcode. And that can happen because of a recent migration and there were issues with the migration and barcodes didn't transfer in. And you can have inconsistent barcodes in some cases. But every ILS user in Evergreen, every patron account has a user ID. It's a system level ID that's assigned to it upon creation or migration of the data into Evergreen. So that's one way to just make sure that everything is counted up accurately. And then the next one is copy ID, and this is when you are counting items. And the same reason goes for using copy ID rather than barcode, is that you can have items in the system without a barcode. And so if you're using the barcode field for counting items or sometimes for the display field, or you're using it for any type of filter, you can actually miss items if they don't have a barcode. So using a copy ID, which is a system level assigned number that you'll never really see, really, make sure that everything does show up in your report. And then the last one is typically really only for some of the hardcore users. Most people, when they're doing a count of items, you use the copy ID, but some people want to know more about, say, how many titles do we have in the collection, how many unique titles versus how many copies. Like we can have 5 copies of, James Patterson's newest title, but if we do a count of record ID rather than copy ID, all of those 5 titles, 5 copies of that title will count as one. And that can sometimes show you certain things about your collection. And of course, one of the things that we try and emphasize with everyone is that when you're searching for report templates in the reporter and you find something you like, clone it into your own folder, and I will show you the process for doing that. Because if you create a report based off a template in someone else's folder, they will no longer be able to delete that template, or in some cases, do other things with it. And that, of course, isn't very polite if they decide that they want to clean up their, templates folders. And if they decide to move that template somewhere where it's no longer shared, you will lose access to it. So it's always, just polite, and also it maintains your access to that template if you want to use it again in the future, to clone it into your own folder so that it doesn't affect other people's work and you can continue to have access to it if that other person decides to move that template. Okay. So first, I'll show you an example of cloning a report that you found in someone else's folder into another folder. Okay, so this is a folder that I have for the reports committee. You will find this in the shared folders under my name of BAPL Brooke, my login name. Okay, you'll find it there in that list. And whatever you decide to use in this list, instead of check marking it and going to create a new report, you want to use the drop down and select clone selected template instead. Now, during this process, after you hit submit, it comes up with a list of folders that you have available to you. And this is where you decide where to save the template that you are cloning, okay? So in my case, I'm going to throw it into the circulation committee real quick here. So you click on that folder, you select the folder using the button here, and then this is the next step of cloning a report. Now this is also your opportunity to tweak a report. You can look at how it's made, okay? You can see the core source here in the top right, or the top left rather, sorry. You can see the core source for this template is circulation. You can see what the displayed fields are. And you can also see what the filters are by clicking on that tab. And so you can see basically how this template is built. And this is your opportunity to tweak it if you decide that there's something missing from it, okay? So for example, in the displayed fields, perhaps I want it to show the name of the checkout library, which actually that field's already there, but maybe I also want it to show the short policy name, so we'll add it. And perhaps I also want it to show the org unit ID, and we'll add that field as well. So while you are cloning a report, you have an opportunity to look at its guts and figure out how it was built by someone else, and you have the opportunity to figure out if you need to tweak it for your own needs. Okay, so while we're doing this here, I'm just gonna move these little bits up so that they appear there we go with the other parts. And then we're going to save this template by clicking this button up here in the top left. It asks you, are you sure? In the process of cloning it, it also adds the word clone to the template name. You can also change the template name during this process as well if you want it to say something else. Okay, gives you a little notification that the cloning was successful. And now we're going to go take a look at the Circ Committee folder. And there is the report that we just cloned. Okay, so I'm going to, now that I've cloned it into a different folder, I'm going to create a report with it. And some people will use the pivot label column. Some people don't. I tend to, if I'm showing data about multiple libraries, but it's something that you should use only if you're really sure that the data set is going to be really small. Okay, so I selected the report folder that the report from this template is going to go into. I select the library that I want to see. I select the, actually I should select multiple ones here. You can see more about it. And you can see an example here of where you can be creative about the filter and transforms that you use for date filters, rather. You can be creative with the transforms that you use for date filters. In this case, for checkout date and time, I have the transform set to year. And that means that I don't have to put in between two dates. For example, some people will use date for the transform. And for the operator, they'll put between, and that results in 2 date fields that you have to fill in. And in that case, you would be putting in January 1st, 2019 to December, 31st, 2019, etc. I tend to like my filter transforms to be something a little bit simpler. And so in that case, I set the transform to year, and all I have to put in is the year. Okay? And then this down here at the bottom is where the recurring report setup comes into play. So in almost every case, you want to uncheck bar charts. I just kind of did that out of habit, because a lot of times it can sometimes slow your report down, and sometimes the data that you're expecting to output will not be bar chart friendly. And because it's not bar chart friendly, it can sometimes cause it to fail, or at least take a day or 2 to run. And then underneath that is a line that discusses recurring report, and that is just a little check mark. Okay? And once you check mark it, a field underneath it becomes usable. When it's unchecked, it's grayed out. When you check on it, it becomes usable. And this line is all about recurrence interval. Now, I do have a cataloger who wants me to run a report on holds ratio every day. I said no, because it's a very long report and it takes a while to run. So I asked him if it was okay if it runs once a week instead, and he was content with that. And then you also have the option to have it run once a month, or you could have it run multiple times per day or week or month. Okay, so in this case, we're going to have it run once per month, and that specifies that this report is going to recur all on its own once a month. And then the field after that is how you control when it happens. So if you don't mess around with this date field underneath, it'll run once a month on today's date, which is the 26th, which of course, for most of us, that's going to be either too late or too early. So instead of doing run as soon as possible, we have this date selector. Okay. So what I tend to do first is select the time. And here you can set it up to run really early in the morning, so that if you have a big report that you know has a lot of data to output, it can run super early in the morning when no one else is using the system, or at least fewer people are actively using the system. And it will run faster, and it causes less slowdown for people who are using the system during the day. Okay, so I tend to select 1 or 2 a.m. And then here is where you can specify, I want this to run on the 1st of next month. And so this is actually having this report run at a future date. It won't run now, but it'll run at a future date on the 1st of July. And then every month thereafter, it'll occur on the same date, the 1st of the month, and at the same time in the morning. Now, something that I learned when I went to the Evergreen conference this year is you can actually backdate with this field. So, for example, what if you want this report to run not just on the 1st of every month in the future, but you also want an output now? You can actually say, I want this to run on the 1st of June, which is, of course, in the past. And when you set this up to run, it'll do an output now, as well as on the 1st of every month in the future. So that's kind of an example of where before I learned this, I had to have one report that ran immediately for the numbers and then set up another report as a recurring report. I don't have to do that anymore. Okay, And then after that is a field for email notification. And this is really nice because it sends you an email with a link to the results output in that email so that you don't have to go all the way into the reporter in Evergreen to see the output. And if you want to send this to someone who doesn't know how to use the reporter in Evergreen, or they're not terribly familiar with Evergreen, you can forward this link, or you can put in additional emails just by separating them with a comma, for example here, okay? So you can put in as many emails there as you want, just separate them with a comma. And then after that, you want to select your folder where the output is going to live. So in that case, I'm going to select the circulation committee, actually, because that's where this report template clone is currently living. And then we're going to save the report. We'll get a notification that that succeeded. And we'll go and look at the outputs folder. So here we can see that there is a report that's running, and it says pending. So that means that the report isn't finished yet. Okay? But as we keep looking at it, there we go. Now we have the finished report, and its runtime, even though it didn't really run on the 1st, it shows that its runtime was at 2 a.m. on the 1st of June. And then we see another pending report for July 1st at 2 a.m. And that will then change every time a new recurring report runs. When this one comes around, this will change to August 1st at 2 a.m. And you'll have the output for July down here instead. So I'm going to go in here and take a look at the output. And because I know that this is a fairly small one, I can just go right into tabular. And here's an example of where understanding the field names that you're using for your outputs versus your filters can be very handy. The organizational unit ID for every library at its base is a number. If you were looking at your computer OPAC for patrons or your online catalog online, at the end of that website address, there's a number which constitutes your organizational unit ID for your library. Okay, and that's just how Evergreen does things. It takes everything down to a number at its simplest form. But of course, those numbers don't really mean anything to us, which is why when you're building a report template, that it's best to use the organizational unit ID for a filter, but it's not so good to use for a displayed field. Thank you. Instead, you'll want to look deeper in the fields for the short policy name, which can be a little bit more descriptive, and then also the library name as well, which spells everything out more. And this is also an example of how setting up to use the pivot label column can be very handy. If I hadn't set that up, instead of the dates coming out in a line like this, going to the right, we would have everything going down instead. So these fields that show the name of the library would repeat over and over with the different dates and numbers going down instead. So sometimes the output looks a little bit cleaner if you use the pivot label column. But again, it's to be used carefully, because if you have a lot of data to pivot, it can slow down the system. So you want to make sure that you're just using that option for simple and small data outputs. Okay, go back to the reports committee folder where we have examples of some very basic report templates that are all recurring friendly. So in this case, we have a count of circulations by location and year. So for this template, all you have to do is name the report. And what I end up doing, because it is something that I can use year after year, I just name it, Circ 2019. And then when 2020 comes around, I just create a new report that says 2020. And that's how you can differentiate between all of the reports that will show up in your folder, even though they're all coming from the same template. Okay? And then the way that you build a report has a very large impact on how friendly the template is for recurring options. And in this case, I kept the display fields very simple by just having them show the checkout date and the library that it was checked out at. And then the filters are very simple. I have them going by the checkout library. You can select a list of them. And then the checkout date and time filter is set to a year, which means it's just really easy to type in there quick. Or if you use the calendar, if you select any date on there, it will put it in. Okay, so if I just select a date from there, it automatically converts it to the format that you want it to be. And then that means that this report, once you set it up, is good to run from January until the next January. And the reason why you want to wait to set up a new report for the next year until February, actually, is because you won't get your statistics for December until your report for January has run, if that makes sense. Okay. Does anyone have any questions so far? Does anyone need me to go over the basics of reports or anything? Okay. Sounds good. So I have set up several report outputs for each of the demos in here. And so we're going to take a look at those. And I'm also going to show you a kind of nifty report that I made that shows you all of the different options when you are outputting a date. As you might have noticed, whenever you're dealing with a date in reports, there are a lot of options for the transform. And you might be tempted to use something that looks like it could be really useful, and then it kind of isn't. So this is a report that I ran from circulation that shows as many date fields as I could find in different transforms displayed in different transforms. So in this case, we have the raw data, and then we have first and last value, which is the same. Then we have count distinct. Again, not terribly useful for a date field, but that they have it in there. It's just one of those examples of where sometimes the options that are available in Evergreen are just kind of there for bonus, but not necessarily something that you'll end up using. Something that I'm intrigued by is the age transform for date. This is something that could be used for birth date on patrons, but I've experimented with it a little bit, and the only thing is that when using it as a filter, it can be a little unpredictable. So, I have to experiment with that a little bit more. I'll let you know if I run into success with it. But as you can see, it's complicated by the fact that it has a mix of information in there. It has the years, it has months, it has days, and then it has a timestamp, but it's the same for everybody because we don't go asking people what time of day were you born. So everybody's date stamp, or timestamp rather, is the same in that case. But it can be kind of useful if you want to run a report, say, of patrons and display their age in this output, and then you could mess around with it in Excel and filter it certain ways. Barb asked a question in the chat box about count versus count distinct. And when it comes to the date transform for count and count distinct, it's not terribly useful. But when you're coming up with certain types of reports about count and count distinct, it has to do with how it treats duplicate bits of information. So, but in most cases, I have to tell you, it really doesn't come into play. Say one patron checks out the same book twice. Okay, they check out Turkey Trouble on the National Mall, one of those, capital mysteries, and they check it out in January, and then they check it out again in February. If you use count, then it does count both of those transactions. If you use count distinct, it doesn't in some cases. It'll treat them as one. But in most cases, people really don't need to use that field at all. So if you're getting confused about it, it might be something else that's going on with your report, and you should definitely talk to the reports committee about it so that we can try and help you clarify it. And then you have the rest of these date field transforms. As you can see, quarters is not terribly useful. Neither is months ago, because they're just flat dates, and these can be very tricky to use as a filter, to filter on, because it's kind of hit or miss. Month name, you at first might think that this would be very useful because you could have it display very prettily the month name instead of number. The challenge is it will display them in alphabetical order. So when you're sorting, it doesn't pay any attention to the fact that May occurs before June. If you sort it, it'll be in alphabetical order rather than by calendar order. And the same thing with the day name. Then you have hour, which I have done a report once where I was curious to see what hour of the day we were the most busy in Evergreen. And I ran that over the course of a year as a displayed field for checkout time. And that was very interesting, but it took a very long time to run. So that's one of those examples where you will set this up as a report that'll run in the future, but not as a recurring report. So let me show you that real quick. So a lot of times, if you are building a report from scratch and you want to test it, but you're concerned that the data output is going to crash the server, you can leave recurring report unchecked, but still select the run at a certain date and time option and say I could set this report up to run tomorrow at 2 a.m. when the system will be at its least busy and give the report the best chance possible to run till its completion. Otherwise, it might error out or it might crash the server. You never know. There have been a few times when I could swear I could see the smoke from Atlanta from here because I'm pretty sure I crashed something. But it's never really as bad as it sounds because the report server is a separate server from the Evergreen server that our circulations are on. So if the report server goes down, it doesn't affect everyday activity in the rest of the library. And you can also kill a report before it finishes running if you started something and you are kind of nervous about it. So for example, I could go here to this pending report that's supposed to happen on July 1st. I could go up here and select delete selected outputs and hit submit. And it killed the report that was pending later in the month so that it won't happen. And you can do that with any report that you're worried about. It's taking a long time. You're worried it's not set up right or that it's going to crash the system. You can do that. Okay. Continuing on with the date transforms, I find these very interesting. So I suppose I really run on about them. But in the end, the transforms that I find the most useful in my everyday reporting are the year and the year plus month. Because the year plus month, I especially like to use for display because it helps you keep track of reports that are from different years, for example. Like if you used just the month of the year transform, for example here, where it just shows you the month as a number, you could have multiple reports from different years and you wouldn't know that looking at the data. You would have to look at the title of the report to make sure that you have the right year. So I kind of like to use that for the display field because it makes sure that I don't get confused. And it makes sure that the people that I'm sending it to don't get confused. It also has the added advantage that it has leading zeros. Let me see if I can find an example here. Okay, so there's one. So this example here, there we go. So 2018-01, that's an example of where a leading zero is really important because if you then go over to where it just tells you the year, the month of the year, it just has a 1 instead of a 01, and that can affect sorting, which means that if you have a report that you run displaying just the year of the month and it just has that 1, and then you also have, say, December and October in there, they get all grouped together because the leading zero won't keep it in strict numerical order for that reason. So that's why I actually tend to stick with the displayed field with the transform of year plus month. Again, I could go on about date transforms all day, so maybe I just stop there. I'm just going to close that tab because I really could look at that all day. These were very interesting to look through. Okay, so next we're going to look at count of circulations by selected municipality, or actually selected StatCat. And this is a report that I would like feedback from all of you about. And the reason for that is because I built this kind of, with my own library in mind and my own data, and I can't predict accurately how it's going to respond for everybody else. So is there any library who's in the group today with a computer who would like to test this report for us to see how it behaves for you?
What does it do?
And you can speak up, or you can put it in the tab, the chat tab. And what I would like to do is actually set you up as the presenter so that we can all see you using the report. And then we can make sure that it actually behaves correctly for your library.
No, we don't count.
Aw, no volunteers?
I wish I could volunteer, Jennifer, but I hope no one else on the group is. It looks like Tuncanik there. Tuncanik might be able to offer screen sharing. She does not have voice at that location, I believe. Or maybe Barb wants to volunteer to give this report a try. Or Tamaqua. Sorry, Grace. I know who you are, but they don't have voice there, so it might be easier to have someone with voice. Barb, do you want to volunteer? Jennifer, maybe
I'm happy. I'm happy to pitch in, but I had to run away from my desk for a second, so I'm not entirely sure what we're doing.
I would like you to volunteer to clone the count of circulations by municipality report template into your own folders, and then also demonstrate using it for the group.
Okay, I can certainly do that.
All right, so let's try and set you up as a presenter so that everyone can see your screen. Let me know when you're ready, okay?
Go right ahead.
All right.
Okay, so you guys should just be seeing my browser right now, right?
Looks good.
Okay, so we are going into this one
Hey,
here.
Barb, we're seeing more than just the browser. We're seeing your whole desktop. So the corner of your Outlook and a Windows file is also looks like something else is open. I just want to make you aware of that. It doesn't look too confidential, so good work.
Yeah, don't worry. I closed Facebook before I said yes.
Great work, Barb. Thanks for
I'll enlarge it there just for everyone. Okay, so we are going into this folder here and then reports committee. And then we're looking for count of circulations by
selected StatCat, actually. Yes, StatCat.
Perfect. And then we're going to go up to our handy dandy cloning option.
Good.
And then we will put it in circulation. Why not? Actually, we'll put it in my test templates. Folder is selected, and we are on the modification screen.
Good.
All right.
Of course, that's where you have the opportunity to tweak anything if you like. But if you're ready to go ahead and use it, you can go ahead and get started.
I am going to add a description here just in case something happens and I need to come back later to find your copy.
Okay.
And then check our filters. Those look like they should be pretty useful to me. And we're going to hit save. All right, and then we're going to go into my test template folder and check out my clone. All right, I will pick my library. And then this is looking for year in list. So let's check out 2017.
Okay, so you have just 2 StatCats there. I recommend just selecting one.
Okay, we will do school district. So we have a lot of board meetings with those schools right about now. All right, I forgot my
You
folders.
pointed out an important thing there of just picking one of the stat cats. So to get this report, you'd run it each time with a different stat cat selected. Does that make sense?
Yes, that is the recommended way for that. And the reason for that is kind of twofold. A lot of people and Equinox and Evergreen community talk about with StatCats, it's really important to use nullability. And I have found that as long as you keep your requirements for StatCats simple, as in you just want to look at one at a time, you're usually okay without the nullability field. The reason this is kind of, important is that pretty much every time you clone a report, it unchecks the nullability field. So even though I can make a great report that has nullability on it for StatCats, the minute someone goes to clone it, it's unchecked, and it's an extra step that they have to remember. But I have also found that most of us have very simple requirements when it comes to StatCats. We're not looking to look at both of them all the time sometimes. We're just looking to look at one. So as long as that's the case, it will work just fine in most cases. It also depends on people's data, but in most cases, it works fine even without the nullability as long as you're only looking at one.
That's a great explanation, Jennifer. Now we can keep moving on. I hope everyone is following along at home because you can be sitting at your computer running the same test and getting these same results.
Alrighty, so just to review, we've got my library, we've got my year, and we've got our StatCat. I have marked it right in my test.
One thing to add before you hit Save Report. This is an example of where the pivot label column comes in very handy. So that's the pivot label column right on top there, and you want to select the checkout date and time. Why don't you go ahead and actually run it without it though, maybe, so that you can see an example of what it looks like without that selected. And I just want everyone to kind of see the difference and to unselect bar charts. Yes, good. Because whoa, does it slow things down.
Alrighty, let's go ahead and save her. Down to my test report. Here we go. You guys can see all the experimental reports I run.
Oh yeah, I have a much more cluttered one, don't worry. It is a lot of trial and error with this system.
Yes. I like to tinker and then, maybe once a week I'll clear out all the dead ones. Okay, there's our test count of circulations. Let's check it out. Okay, so there we go.
So this is an example of what happens when you don't have the pivot column going on. You can see two entries there for Northern Cambria, and then the circ ID has its own column for those 2 months, and it just keeps coming up again and again for each month. If you have the pivot label, all of these entries become condensed and much more viewing friendly. In fact, they become printable as you see them. Like if you're looking at this data, you're like, oh, I have to go in and I have to organize this in some way that'll make sense to the people I have to present it to, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So that's an example of where if we run this report again using the pivot label, it will be very different.
Alrighty, let's do it. We are going to go to checkout date and time. Going to add a name on here. Everything stays the same. Otherwise, I'm just going to hit save as new. There we go. All right, and the pivot column shows us, wow, big difference.
Yeah, much more readable, isn't it?
Very much so.
Have all of your stat cats in a nice simple line at the beginning, and then you have your dates stacked up at the top. They occur naturally in the correct calendar order, and then you have the circ numbers that are stacked underneath each of those dates, and it's something that's a lot easier to transfer into any report that you need to.
Very cool. Anything else you want me to try while I've got the reins?
How about the report that I have for, let's see, selected, you don't have municipalities, but you do have school districts, so you can kind of, you can test out the count of circulations by selected municipality hard code test. And I'll walk you through that one.
Okay.
You do want to keep up your list of school districts so that you have it handy for the copy and paste. Oh, nope, wait a minute.
Right here?
Oh, rat. I should have specified that you want to make sure that you clone it before you run it.
Oh, good. Okay.
And then during the cloning process, we're going to tweak it.
Okay, hardcode test, clone template, test templates.
Yeah, you're pretty fast there. My goodness. Okay. All right. So the hardcode test is really neat in filters. So if you go to your filters field, you can see that we have an extra filter here in addition to StatCat ID, which lets you select which StatCat you're going to filter on. Then we have the extra one underneath, which is for entry text. Here we're going to look at a specific entry for that StatCat, and we're going to hard code that data in so that, for example, you really only want to pay attention to one school district or two even. You don't care about the rest of the school districts that you have. You just want to report every month that shows you those particular stats for those two school districts. So go ahead and select the entry text line so that it's highlighted, and then under actions, you're going to change filter value. Okay, and so that data is for my library here. Go ahead and clear that out. And you're going to put in your StatCats. So select two of your school districts there, just two.
Okay, let's
and
see
you're going to select them one at a time, I advise.
Okay, do I need to mark brackets?
Nope, you don't need to worry about caps or anything, but put a comma there right after that one, and then go ahead and paste in another one.
Oh, that was weird. There we go.
So there you have two of your StatCat entries next to each other, separated only by a comma. This is an example of hard coding selections that you would normally have to make by hand every time you create the report. This is an example where you can hard code it in so that you don't have to make those selections anymore. You can do the same thing for your library. You can have it select your library ahead of time, and you can turn these into almost a one-touch report, depending on how much, you know, figuring out of things you do ahead of time. Go ahead and hit OK. And save template.
I could see that being useful for zip codes too.
Yes.
All right, test templates. We've got our hard code. And then we're going to go.
Right. Good.
Good. And then we'll do 2018 this time. We'll have fun. And then do I need to select one of these as well?
You should still select school district.
Okay.
Because that is the entry that you are, the entry text that you're looking at. I haven't experimented on whether or not we can get away without doing it because we are experimenting, we're just specifying the entry text. It could be that we don't have to, but keeping things simple, yes. Select the school district.
So basically, it's clarifying you are going to look in school district for these words.
Right.
Got it. All right, test report, test report. I always do those backwards.
Me too.
Okay, let's check it out.
And you can hit tabular output there, and it will show you right in that screen. So you don't have to download it to Excel. And you can expand that. There we go. So there, you don't have to look at the entire list of all of the entries if you don't want to. If you're just looking for specific entries in that StatCat, you can filter those ahead of time by hard coding that filter. You can also leave that filter value blank, and then that template is something that you can use over and over with different values. So you could do the Westmont Hilltop for one report. You could go back and say, oh, I also want to look at this. And so you could add multiple entries and different entries by just leaving it blank. And you would put those entries in during the regular report setup that you do when you're selecting your location, for example.
I lost it. Well,
okay.
That's pretty neat.
So these are all reports that everything in my folder. I think, let's see, I'm going to try and take back presentation if you're okay with that.
Yeah. Do I have to give it to you or will it let you?
Let's see. Carrie will always save us if necessary. Let's see here. And I'm back. There we go. All right. So again, these are just a couple of reports that are all reporter friendly that you can fool around with. One of the other things that I have in here is a list of titles with highest circulation. If you've ever had, you know, your director or someone ask, you know, what's your most popular title that you've had checked out for the last year? There is a way to get that, and this report is the way to go. The output will show you the count of circulations for that title. It'll show you the title, the author, and the publication year because that's the fields that I have in there. And let me show you how that is set up. So if you go into the report setup and you name it, and etc., you'll see a field here for circ ID and count. And then the operator or the action that's acting on it is greater than or equal to. So in this case, you're going to be selecting the library, and you're going to be selecting the year that you want to look at. In my case, why don't we try 2018? And the count of circulations means that you kind of have to make some test guesses. Like I could put in 100 circulations and it will only look at titles that have more than 100 circulations for that list. But as you can see, just so far this year, that list is very short. So what if I went in and I specified in 2019, I want titles that have more than 50 circulations because I want a list of at least 10 to put in a newsletter. So the 10 most popular titles this year so far or something. Okay. We'll set that up. We'll have it run. Yep, 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 yep. And there it is, getting ready to run. Hopefully it won't take too long. There we go, it ran, good. And there I can see that the list is a lot longer. Okay. And so you can select your topmost circulating items. And if you ever see a blank spot like this for circulating items and circulation count, the most likely place to find those blank spots and where they're causing a trouble for you is pre-cats. For example, I know for a fact that our pre-cats are our interlibrary loans. So that number I can actually filter out by adding a circulation modifier filter to this report and having it look at all the circulation modifiers except interlibrary loan, and this will drop out of the report. But just looking at it as now, I can see that our mobile hotspots are the most popular item so far this year. And the nice thing about the way this report and the display fields are set up, because you're not displaying barcodes, you're just displaying the title and the author, it will merge these numbers together. So we have 20 mobile hotspots, but here it shows up as just one line, okay? I think we have, like 10 copies of 9 Perfect Strangers, but it just shows up as one line. And that is because we're not displaying a field that will cause it to display unique entries for that field. So if you select your displayed fields very carefully, it will do a lot of math for you and display the output in a way that you don't have to think about it as much and add numbers together where you don't want to. Okay, it's after 3 o'clock. I have a bunch of other reports here that we could go over if you like, but you are also welcome to go in there and play around with them a little bit. Does anyone feel like they are missing some information about recurring reports, about the best way to set them up or anything?
I think Angie might have a question.
Okay.
Does my microphone work? Can y'all hear me? Awesome.
Yes, we can hear you.
We've had trouble all day with Spark went down and then one of the Wi-Fi went down. In any case, I'm looking for a report that will give me patrons who have been marked as non-resident incorrectly. So I need something that will also give me some identifiable piece, either their patron barcode or first and last name. And it keeps giving me everyone who's been marked yes or no in non-resident and all of the blanks as well.
Okay, so is non-resident field that you're talking about a StatCat?
Yes, it's in our municipality.
Okay, so that's an example where you have to be very careful how you set up the report. Do you have a computer that we can walk this through with you?
Sure.
Okay. I'm going to try and set you up as the presenter if I can find you in here. Okay, Angie, you are set for the presenter. It's going to prompt you there.
Yeah.
Okay, now the reason I'm handing this over to you is that every library has their own separate StatCat fields. So I can build reports for other libraries to a certain point, but then after that, I can't quite predict how things turn out, but I can get you started. So
Awesome.
Why don't you go into my folder for the count of, if you go to shared template folder, down underneath there, look for Babel Brook, about fourth from the top, look in reports committee. Okay. Now, which one should we mess with first? We're going to look at the count of circuit. I'm going to, how about count of new patrons by location and year? We're going to take that report and mess with it. And it's the third from the bottom. That one, yeah. Now remember to clone it. All right, so first we're going to go under the filters tab. Click on your filters tab there.
Nope, sorry. The Wi-Fi's been spotty today, so it's
That's okay.
a good day.
All right, so we see that the filter for is deleted is there. That's good. The filter for home library and in list is there, record creation date. Go ahead and take that field out. Because we are, if you go to the actions there, yep, good. Remove the field. Okay, good. Now we're going to add some things. So you want to go up to where it says ILS user with that little arrow next to it. Nope, that's the source. You want to keep the source underneath. No. I know, I sound terrible, but I'm trying to correct people over the phone.
No, me
Okay.
and my mouse are having some difficulties.
Okay, so on the left-hand side, where it says ILS user and it has that little triangle next to it, click on that triangle. There you go. This is the waterfall that I like to describe it as. You know, the source is the ocean, and then you access different parts of the ocean using this waterfall and various rivers that are underneath it. Okay, as I like to have this little allegory going. And so underneath here, you want to look for the field that says StatCats. That should be all the way at the bottom. Okay, statistical category entries. All right, and then select the statistical category underneath that. Okay, now at this point, you don't have anything in that middle field under source path, and that's because you need to select something for it to look at here. So underneath the part where it says statistical category entries, you see just statistical categories. You want to click on the part that says statistical category. Right there. Good. Now, in this list, you see a bunch of things. One of them is StatCat ID. That is something that I filter on a lot. Okay, the StatCat ID at its base is a number. But when you filter on it, you can use it to filter out all of the other StatCats that you might be using. So go ahead and add that. Oops, it's not going. Click on it again. And then add fields there.
Is anybody
Good.
else besides me having this kind of day?
No, it's fine. Okay, now we're going to go to displayed fields. This is going to be a two-part process. We're going to create a report. This is still going to be a count. It's going to tell us how big of a problem you're dealing with. And then the next report is going to show us the specific ones to deal with. So in this case, go ahead and take the field for record creation date out. And then we're going to add a field. And the part that you want to click on, oops, that's the StatCat ID. We're actually going to add a different part. That's okay. So go ahead and remove that for me real quick. All right, so we're going to go back to the left-hand side in the waterfall, but stay down there. Go back down. And the entry text for a statistical category is actually above it. So if you go to the part where it says statistical category entries and click on that. Beep.
Oh my God.
I'll move it over. Click
I
on
promise
the
I'm not
actual
normally this
text.
much of a spaz.
There we go. Good.
Oh God.
Click right there. Click. Got it. All right. You can see that the fields that you have available in the middle there changed, and one of them says entry text. So that is the actual text that is in a statistical field. So go ahead and click on that and add that field. All right. I think this is now set up to use to tell you how many you need to fix. So go ahead and go up to the top and rename this whatever makes sense to you. Count of patrons by whatever. Okay, hit Save Template. I'm hoping that this is set up right. All right, so now we need to go to where you saved it. Good, and now we're going to set up this report to run. All right. And let's see what's available for your pivot label columns. I think entry text, library, yep. Select library there so that we make sure everything goes in the right direction. Select your folder. Municipality, good. Uncheck bar chart. And select your output folder and save and cross our fingers. All right, so now let's go to your output folder and babysit. And like any watched pot, it will refuse to boil for the length of time that you are watching it. So you can refresh your page to see if it has finished. Another way to get it to refresh the page without losing your place is to click on the folder over and over to get it to reload. So if you click on your patrons output folder there again, it will refresh, but you'll get to stay in the same place. And this is where I go crazy clicking on it.
That's definitely a great tip, Jennifer. I know I get impatient sometimes here, but it is important to know that sometimes the report server, certain reports will take longer than others. And we have talked about
Absolutely.
scheduling reports overnight if it turns out that it's a big, long, huge report that could clog things up during busy times of day. We want to make sure our system is operating as effectively as possible.
Absolutely. Yeah, that is one of those examples where if it's a new report that I haven't really tried it out before, I do set it up to run it overnight the first time just to see what happens. I'm hoping that we did enough on this one that we can get it in a minute or two.
It's also something to make a note that if you run a report that you think is a pretty simple report and you've done it before, and for some reason this time it's taking an extra long amount of time, you can send that in to the support help desk area, and then if it is a problem for other libraries, we can contact Equinox and have them take a look at the report server to see what's causing a problem. So I've seen at some times where they've told us a specific report may have stalled, and during those times, Lugene and I might contact the person whose report stalled to find out, oh, well, your report stalled this. Is this something you normally run? We're not critical at all, because the only way we're all going to learn is by trying something and failing. But we want you to be able to answer, to be able to know, okay, I tested a report, it worked or it didn't work. But we also want you to feel comfortable reporting if you notice that it is going particularly slow. So if it's a report you've run many, many times, you can let us know, wow, it's taking significantly longer today.
Exactly.
Is anyone else in your home libraries playing along today? Has anyone else had successful reports run in the last 5 minutes?
I know with StatCats it can sometimes really take a long time. But it could be that with all the reports that we've been running during the session that we've been doing, that the server is kind of slowing down a little bit.
Well, indeed, if we do discover that it is a problem with resources, that's an issue that Pales and Spark will work together to address with our current hosting vendor service provider. So this is why it's important for us to learn and know these things. I'm just curious if any other reports, like if someone here listening on the line has an opportunity to run one of the reports that you run that is usually really fast, give that a try and let us know if it's just this report that's taking a long time, or if you can have success right now running another report, something you've run before that's usually very quick. Meanwhile, while we hit the refresh button, is there anything else you want to talk
There
about?
it is.
There it goes.
Oh, there it is. Hooray. I just have to be more patient, don't I?
I do always find that is the case sometimes. All right, so we'll take a look at the output. Oops. You can click on tabular output there, and it should, I don't think it's going to be too big.
Oh my
So
goodness.
Angie?
Yep, it's doesn't like my windows on top of windows.
Yeah.
Let's see if I can fix this. You guys can't see what I can see.
No, I think we're just looking at the screen where it's, there we go. Try that.
All right.
Okay.
Yeah.
click on the View Report Output again.
It's up. It's just fighting with the screen share. And I'm looking for a setting that will give me back to.
There's usually a setting that says show window or show desktop, I think. And sometimes I've had problems where a certain window isn't displaying either because I have too many open, so.
There we go.
There we go. Okay. So there you can see a list of all of your municipalities. Okay. And so you can stretch out that first column there and figure out how many are under whichever stat cat is worrying you.
Yep, so I've got 320.
So you have an other PA stat cat. We have something similar to that as well. All right. And so in that case, now that we know how many we need to work with, we're going to take that same report that you had, and we're going to clone it and tweak it again.
Are you printing a lot of stuff? No. Okay.
Okay, so if you go up to your reports template, to the one that you already, or actually your templates folder, I apologize. All right, so we're going to clone that one and we're going to tweak it some more. All right, so we're going to do 2 bits. The first part is with the filters. We're going to add an extra filter here, and the filter that we're going to add is the statistical cat entry text. So you remember where that was? Underneath the ILS user, you go down to statistical category entries, click on that, on the text there where it says statistical category entries. Oh, there we go.
There we go.
Select entry text and add that as a filter. Oops, the one underneath, not ID. There we go. Very good. Add that. Very good. Now we want to go to display field. All right, so here it's not displaying useful info, so to speak. So we're going to change what it displays. So you can go ahead and delete all of those fields if you like. And so the field that you really want to pay attention to is going to be up higher. One of them is going to be under the field that says current library card. So if you look at the waterfall, go up a little bit, but then not too far. Click on current library card. And click on barcode. And you're going to add that one. And then you're going to go all the way up to the tippy top of the waterfall and click on ILS user again. That one, good. And you're going to take first name and last name from there. And everything in there is in alphabetical order, so sometimes they're not very logical. And is there any other data that you would find useful?
I think that's a great start.
Okay.
And
why don't we roll with it?
Else I can, fingers crossed.
All right, go up to the top. All right, great, submit there. All right, select municipality from that list. Good. Now, in that red box, this is where you got to be very careful what you type. You got to type in the entry exactly as it appears in the output. So other PA, all the capitals and everything, but double check how it looks in that Excel output. I think that we should go back to it and double check how that looks. And you can actually copy and paste from that Excel spot right in. Good. Make sure that it's exactly what you want it to be. Uncheck bar chart. Select your folder and save report and pray. No, not really. This is pretty reliable. I think we have it set up because I have done the same thing. When we first migrated onto the system, all of our access patrons were under under other PA. It drove us nuts. We had to do this whole project of going in and fixing them. And wow, that one was fast, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And that's because we were looking for a very specific output of data. So you should have exactly what you need to go in there and start fixing it.
This is so much better.
Good.
Many thank yous.
You're welcome.
For those who don't know Excel, can you show quickly how to turn that column A into the actual barcode? That's one of the things I know early Excel folks can sometimes have a question with. Thank you.
Sure. Oh, sorry, I probably did that too quick because I was already thinking about it. So if you choose your column and then choose format cells, you can make it whatever you want it to be, because I know these should only be barcodes, but some of our old barcodes have letters or numbers or symbols at the end. It gets a little wonky now that we're going to a shared card, which is why I need this report. I'm going to choose number, and I'm going to reduce the decimal places to 0, even though some of them might have text, like this one has a point something something. You can also choose specific formats. If you're looking for a time, you can have it reduced down to just hours and minutes and delete the seconds. Or you can create a custom tab. So if you know that it's supposed to look like something, you can say it's so many digits plus a letter at the end.
Good.
But for my peace of mind today, because I'm already, having difficulties with my technology, I'm just going to choose numbers and making sure that they're all used as a digit. And it doesn't, oh, yep, I do. You guys can see I have a couple that have weird symbols at the end, and those will hopefully get mitigated out. The other thing that we have that's weird is some have spaces on the end, so they might not line up identically. You just have to be aware of whatever your patron barcoding system is.
Yeah, that's a case of what's called non-standard check digits. The bane of every migrator's existence.
Yes, that's why we sent Jason, who did our migration and our barcodes, like so many thank yous and happy thoughts. He recreated code to somehow make 23 different iterations of barcodes work. So
yeah,
this is awesome. I can make this work. Thank you, Jen.
All right. So I'm going to take back the screen.
Yeah.
Okay. Very good. I'm glad you got what you needed, Angie.
Thank you.
Now we're an hour and 35 in, and I think that's a good place to pause. I want to reinforce with everyone. We could go longer because I could talk about this all day, but I do have to go back to work at the rest of this building someday. And I want to reinforce with everyone that you can absolutely send emails to the reports committee, and we will work on any reports that you need help with as much as we can. Okay, so I think we're going to wrap that up unless anyone has any other questions.
I want to thank you, Jennifer, and the Reports Committee for hosting today's session. This was very awesome. I am going to process, upload, take care of the recording. It may be a few days before it's available, but I will then send that link out once it is available for everyone to see. It does take some time to process and combine the audio and the video. So I'll get that to you as soon as we can, and we will keep on working together to make things great. This has been an excellent opportunity for us all today. So thank you again, Jennifer, and to all of you who participated. We appreciate it. This is a great community. I'm so thankful to be a part of it too.
All right, everyone. Have a good day.